All right, we're live. Hi, my name is Elizabeth Johnson, and I'm one of four co-founders of Wari. Wari is located in Seattle's Central District, which is our historically redlined neighborhood. And we use arts and culture as a way to fight the displacement of Black people from Black. Hi, my name is Elizabeth Johnson, and I'm one of four co-founders of Wari. Wari is located in Seattle's Central District. So I'm super excited to have here Mark Modimola, who is one of our artists in residence this year and created very incredible work with us. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about him, and then I'm going to give him the floor to tell you more about his practice. So Mark Modimola is a South African artist based in Johannesburg, working in digital art, drawing, and painting. His works explore the rhythms of African identity, carrying a spirit that emphasizes the supernatural experience of Blackness. Modimola's work explores the natural themes in the search of a deeper connection between Africans and nature. He's inspired by nature's persona and its impression on the human spirit. Known for his surreal illustrations, his collaborations with Africa Fashion Week International for Johannesburg Fashion Week in 2018 and Jaguar for 2021, hashtag Give Her Crown campaign. His work has been published in Afropolitan Magazine and The Crawls 2019, Guide to African Spirituality, Volume 0, and the South African graphic novel called All Rise, which is for sale, available for sale internationally. His accolades go on and on. This younger artist remains a growing and vibrant presence in the international art community. So please join me in learning more about Mark. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I would just also, while I have the opportunity, like to thank Wari again for hosting me at my residency this year. It was an incredible and insightful experience. And the work that I actually did create was very much inspired by the residency process itself and me coming to Seattle from South Africa. And so, yeah, thank you again to Wari for providing that opportunity and facilitating that process. So I'll just share my screen and walk you through some of the works that I created and where I'm coming from with them. Just give me a second here. Okay. Elishaba, maybe you could just confirm to me that you can see the artwork.
I can. It looks great.
All right, wonderful. So the first artwork that you can see here is titled Sitari. And Sitari in the Tswana language, a South African language, means a tree. And so the term Sitari also means medicine. And the dual meaning of it explains the healing quality of viewing trees and being around nature. And so I first wanted to introduce this work to the audience that would be viewing the works at Wari in order to obviously show the kind of work that I create, but also the inspiration that I draw my work from, which stems from nature and spending time around nature and building memories around nature, and from that, building identity from it. And so Sitari looks at the idea of creating a safe space, creating a memory that lives in your mind. It lives in a communal space, and so it exists in the sky. And it's also a place, nature's a place, it's a sacred place that exists, let's say in a secret place within you, because it is your source. And so this work came from that idea of creating a sacred place within your memories that you can always tap back into. And it's a memory that exists within the community. And so the work itself also, it stems from where I was. And what I mean with that is that some of the work, well, this work specifically is created using clay and other natural materials that I sourced while I was in South Africa and while I was in Seattle. And so the browns and the yellows that you see are actually coming from clay and turmeric, and the other colors, the browns and the blues, the blacks, those come from charcoals and I believe, pastels. So my idea with that was, representing nature, using nature to reinforce that spiritual quality about it. And so the second work that you can see here is titled Letsaka Moya. And this was actually the first work that I started while I arrived. And I'll just add that when I came to Wari, I arrived with 4 primed canvases and created the works within the month. And my goal with that was not only to challenge myself to see if I could, what I could create in terms of a narrative, but to be fully inspired by the process of the residency, to see how we relate to each other as Africans and African Americans, but also how our stories of our proximity to nature relate to each other. And so I had ideas about what kind of works I might create, but I left it quite loosely. And so Letsaka Moya, it comes from that process. And I'll say that the crow sitting on top of the woman's, let's say, crown, was inspired by that process of me being in Seattle and noticing the birds, during my walks. The foliage is also inspired by foliage that I observed while I was in the country. And the narrative around it, Letsaka Moya, is a South African term or a Tswana term that it means to play with spirit or to play with the wind. And as you can see, there's a figure that is playing a flute, and she's wearing, or it could be a he or a she, is wearing, attire, and it looks like ceremonial or ritual attire. And so the clothing that she's wearing and how she's carrying the foliage on her head, these are all symbols that we use in our culture. I will say broad South African and African culture, where women carry things on their heads. It's a way of transporting things, but it can also be a metaphor for what's on your mind and the things that you carry in your life. And she's playing this flute, and it looks like, morning, or it could be midday, and she is essentially coming out of nature. She's, representing this tree spirit or nature spirit, and she's playing the sound of nature, calling people to rise. And while she's doing this, she's dressed in what would be traditional military attire. She's wearing a breastplate on her back, which would have been worn by Tswana warriors in the 1800s, just before colonialism. And she's also wearing a cloth, a white cloth, and these bands that would be made of natural materials. And these are worn by Sotho women during initiation, actually, high up in the mountains. And on top of her head, on top of the foliage, is a shield that would have been made out of cowhide, but in the artwork, it's either gold or bronze or some kind of precious metal, and she's wearing it on her head instead of holding it up, as she's protecting herself, but also the message that she's bringing. And so, yeah, Letsaka Moya effectively represents this natural spirit that's calling people to rise, and that was kind of meant to be the highlight work that would form part of this relating process between me and the community I was, spending time with at Wari and in Central District. And so the conversations that came around while I was creating this work were quite interesting themselves, just because, the people who I spoke with were obviously people in the community, and we spoke about injustices, we spoke about rising up, we spoke about revolution, of course, we spoke about nature, and we spoke about how we see ourselves. And these conversations are the types of, I guess, concepts that we build our own psyche of how we see ourselves around. And so it was important for me to kind of create this work that stood as like a, this symbol of rising up and a call to action. yeah, so that's the that's the idea of Letsaka Moya, which again relates to the idea of playing with spirit and yeah, the spirit of obviously revolution and all of that. I had a second term that I used for the artwork while I was writing about it, which was the reveal or le reveal, which relates to the morning song that's played on a trumpet by soldiers, usually to wake other soldiers up and let them know that it's time to wake up and start the day. And that for me related to the American artist Charles White, who, while I was in Seattle, I read about. He was a muralist and a painter and an incredible draftsman. He made a lot of artwork that ended up in a lot of the Black communities and libraries. And so his work speaks a lot about the life of Black people and how we see ourselves in America and in our communities and the things that we strive for. And so he had created a series called Jacques. And the series had a work that's kind of similar to the work that you see here. It's a woman carrying straw on her head. And when I saw that, and I had already worked on this work, it kind of connected the dots of this universal message of people continuously having to rise up and speak to injustices and where that inspiration comes from. And for me, it's obviously coming from nature and drawing energy from that. So yeah, Charles White was a big inspiration in terms of just formulating how I would communicate the work, because the work came to me before I had an idea of what this meant. And so that was a really good sort of reference for me to pull from. And interestingly enough, Jacques, the term, it references an article that I believe a French writer wrote regarding some injustices that were happening in the French government itself. And they put into question the idea of the citizen and how people are treated not only in a community, but in a nation. And so for me, it was, a subtle way to speak to Black issues without outwardly, talking Black struggle once again and making it look like struggle. Yeah, I'll move on to the next work. And so the work we have here, I hope it's clear on everyone's side, but it's titled Indaba. And Indaba is a Zulu term, which means a meeting, a big meeting, in fact. And so the work for me, it came from this idea, again, of people coming to a message or people coming to a meeting to receive a divine message, something that teaches us about ourselves. And so while thinking about it, I wanted to create this narrative where there is a mother who she's bringing her daughters to the meeting for the first time. Obviously she's gone to a meeting. And sorry, some context on why the term Indaba. So the term Indaba, culturally, it would be, a meeting place of elders where people come and they discuss the affairs of the state or the community. And so this is generally something that happens amongst adults within the context of our cultures. But in the artwork, you see the woman bringing her children into the conversation. And the conversation is happening between her and the moon, the full moon that's at the top of the image, which would represent, obviously the cosmos and the universe, maybe God, whoever you might be aiming this divine figure at, but it would represent having a divine conversation with yourself or your creator. And she's bringing her children into this teaching. And
Mark,